Welcome to The Good Ride. I'm James Beastie, and I've been deeply committed to an open relationship with snowboard gear that's gone on longer than my relationship with my wife, and that's almost 2 decades now. Yeah, I'm pretty old. And today I'm talking about the 2025 all-mountain favorites. There is also a low-cost all-mountain favorites. It's not super cheap, but it's $500 and below. So check that out as well. And there are a lot of great all-mountain boards out there, more than any other category of snowboard. And we're at a time where brands are making a lot of amazing boards. So if your board didn't make this list, it still could be a great board for you. This is not a pay-to-play favorites list. I don't charge the brands to get their board featured here. I don't even require to keep the boards. I don't take any outside influence in my decision-making process. These boards earned their place on this list strictly by how they ride and by extensive testing and comparing same boots, same bindings, often same runs in a wide variety of different conditions. I'm no ripper, but I've ridden close to 800 snowboards and closer to 1,000 if you count the different models I've tried over the years. And these boards I would love to own, and I find myself often recommending to readers that email me and ask for advice. Now, if you want to support honest and objective reviews like this, it's greatly appreciated if you would buy through our links to Blauer Board Shop. Blauer is a snowboard-only shop with a large online presence. They ship fast, respond quickly, and they'll price match with the best of the big stores out there. They've been supporting snowboarders for a very long time. So if something we reviewed appeals to you, try to buy through Blauer Board Shop. So what's an all-mountain board to the Good Ride? This is a board with a normal length, normal width. It has mild to no taper, has a very centered feeling between the feet when you're on reference stance, but it has some ability to set back so you can get directional, easier float in powder. All mountain boards are also very neutral in how you weight your turn. You can front foot, center weight, or back foot weight your turn, and they'll respond equally well. If you want something more directional, more set back, more tapered, with more float, and that stiffer, faster, better carving experience, you want to look at our free ride, alternative free ride, short wide, and snow surf favorites to see if those boards are better for you. And if you want to know more about these boards, check out the in-depth reviews at thegoodride.com. Also go to our snowboard review page, check out our comparison tool, our sorts, our filters, and all the other all-mountain boards out there to see how they might compare to your board. So first up on the list for 2025 is the Cardiff Crane. This is the all ability level, do everything kind of ride. It's fine for committed beginners with a lot of cash to advanced to expert riders. This has a slightly tapered directional shape, but it feels more like a true twin, and it only has 1 to 3 millimeters of taper. I almost thought this was a directional twin when I was riding it. This rides switch incredibly well. You're 20 millimeters set back on side cut at a 22-inch stance width, but if you want to set it back in powder, you can get 2.375 inches back from center of board with a 22-inch stance width. That's very good for a board like this. This is a hybrid camber board with 65% camber and 35% rocker. It has a very forgiving, very stable, consistent feel in all conditions. They have little extension almost near where the camber ends that just really accentuates the grip in hard snow without grabbing in soft snow at all. It's a very competent feel. This has a medium, almost bordering on medium soft flex, and this new construction gives you better pop than before, but at the sacrifice of a little dampness, especially in soft, uneven, messy snow. It can buck and bounce a little more than some of the other boards on this list, but it's easy to butter and it has pretty good pop. This initiates a turn medium to medium fast depending on your boot size. It has a pretty balanced turning radius, and it's got pretty good but not exceptional spring out of the turn. It's still fun to carve though. This is great on a straight line into a jump. It might not be an all mountain bomber, but it's got competent mountain speed like most of the boards on this list. And this base is exceptionally fast. It's one of the fastest bases on this list. Next up is a board I own and love, the 2025 Capita Black Snowboard of Death. And if you find a 2024, that'll do too. This is on the list because it's very versatile, of course, but it also has a nice balance of being forgiving yet still being poppy. And this board is just fun to ride. It never feels too technical, too overwhelming. It allows you to be more aggressive, but it doesn't feel boring ever. This is good for anybody who's a basic intermediate up to being expert. It's a directional shape with 1.5 millimeters of taper, so very little taper, and it has that non-tapered feel for sure. It's only a 1/2 inch back on side cut, but if you want to set it back in powder, you can get 2.5 inches back from center of board at a 22-inch stance width, which is really good for an all mountain board. I just recently rode this in powder, and it has much better directional float than the old Black Snowboard of Death, and that's what brought this up into the favorites list. This has a bit of a complicated directional camber with a good bit of early rise before the nose. It has camber between the feet, then flat to a little kick in the tail. It's not full on forgiving, but it's pretty forgiving and has a very stable, consistent feel in all conditions. There's a 1.5 millimeter bump on each side of the waist that helps to improve edge hold, but it's not exceptional. It's still more of a good snow ride, but it's a little more competent when the snow starts to get a little bit hard. The flex is medium, but it never stops flexing. And the minute you stop that flex, it has this really lively, energetic pop back. Capita is doing some really special stuff with their flex engineering. It's pretty easy to butter in the nose and not bad in the tail, but a little more work. It has a lot of pop on an ollie with that flat off the tail, and it's got a more lively flex personality than you would think for having such a mellow camber. One thing about this dynamic flex personality is it does get a little bucky in thick, soft, uneven snow. It's better than most of the Capita boards out there though, so it's not a full-on deal breaker. This has medium fast turn initiation, and when you get it on edge, it has a pretty balanced, fun turning experience that allows any kind of radius turn. And while I like this pop on an ollie a little better, I still think it has pretty good spring out of the turn, and it's a very rewarding carver for a board with this flex. No all mountain board is really a bomber, but this does very well for its flex. The base is super fast and well built, but it has a lot of structure. I needed to put a lot of wax on top of it to get the structure from grabbing too much in certain conditions. Next up is another new board for the list, the United Shapes Horizon. This is the best board in powder on this list, and one of the most versatile rides overall. This is best for intermediate to expert snowboarders. It's a tapered directional shape. It looks more directional than it is, and it only has 4 millimeters of taper. They don't publish the reference stance on side cut, but it feels pretty centered, and I would guess it's around 22.25 to 22. But if you set it back in powder with full-size discs only, you can't get this set back with mini discs, and it kind of ruins the whole experience of this board. But you can get 4.375 inches back from center of board with a 22.25 inch stance width. That's exceptional for an all mountain board, and it really transforms this ride from this centered, almost mountain freestyle twin kind of feel to this very set back, directional free ride kind of feel. That's what truly makes this board so special. It's got camber that goes well past the inserts, but there's a good bit of early rise in the nose and a little bit in the tail as well. So that helps with float and makes it a little more forgiving too. There's no real disruption in this side cut, so the edge hold isn't amazing, but it's pretty competent and does well in borderline hard snow. It has a very medium flex to it that's pretty easy to butter in the nose and tail, but it has very good pop to it, has a little bit of carbon stringer in there, but not too much to make it chattery and cranky. And this board handles all conditions very well. A lot of the snow I rode this in was soft and uneven, and it handled it like a champ. It does fine in hard uneven snow as well. This has pretty fast turn initiation, especially for its width. It has a very balanced turning radius that allows you to do any kind of turn you want, and it has very solid spring out of the turn. When you ride this centered, it feels very center weighted and fun, but if you're riding on the setback inserts, it's very fun to carve that way too and get a more directional feeling carve. Not a full-on bomber, but very competent for any size kicker you wish to take on, and it's pretty good for an all-mountain board. The base has very good glide, and it's all black and easily repairable. Next up is the Nitro Alternator. This is the full camber, technical, go big, rippers board on the list. This is for committed advanced riders to expert riders. It's tapered and directional. It has 6 millimeters of taper, and it doesn't really feel that tapered. This has a really long nose and a short tail, but you're only 15 millimeters back on side cut, so it feels much more centered than it looks. If you want to set it back for POW, you can get 3.065 inches back from center of board at a 22-inch stance width. That's a lot. So it really helps give you more directional float than you would think, along with that big nose for being full camber. And speaking of full camber, this is very technical, very catchy. I had moments on this that I loved, but moments it really sapped my confidence. This is a dual radius side cut, but it's not truly a disrupted side cut. I found that it gripped pretty well in hard snow, but not full-on hard or icy snow. This flex feels down the center medium, but with that full camber, it's not very easy to butter in the nose, and even more so in the tail, but it has exceptional pop. It really pops well on an ollie, and it doesn't take as much work as you would think for being this technical and aggressive. What surprised me though was how good this was in all conditions, especially hard, uneven snow and soft, uneven snow. They're really doing something cool with this flex personality to allow it to be so damp off-piste and in messy snow or hard uneven snow, but still be so poppy. Not many boards can do that. If sized correctly, the turning experience is medium quick. When you get it on edge, there's a very balanced turning experience that might lean a little touch on the turny side, but overall it works with any kind of turn you want to make. And the spring out of the turn is arguably one of, if not the best on this list. I had so much fun turning this board. This can point it for any size kicker, off-piste or in the park if you want to. And the base glide is good but not great. It needs to be waxed more consistently than maybe some others. Now next up is a board I own and love, and it made this list because this is one of the most poppy boards with early rise I've ever tried. The one I just showed you is an older model, but it's the same exact board as the new one, just different graphics. This is more for committed intermediates on up to experts. It's slightly tapered and slightly directional. It has a 20 millimeter setback on side cut at about a 21.5-inch stance width. They don't really say their reference stance, but that's what I'm saying. And if you want to set it all the way back on board, you can get negative 2.65 inches at a 22-inch stance width. And this has this very cool centered feel when you're more on reference, and it gives you some decent directional float when you set it back in powder, but it's not the best on the list. And one thing to mention is that when you're riding this in powder, the personality changes a little bit. It goes from being really turny to feeling more gunny, straight-liney, powerful. Some will love that, some won't, but this camber with early rise in the nose and tail, and then all these passive bends throughout the camber make it more like a bow and arrow in terms of spring and pop, while not being too technical or catchy. There's a very mellow disruption in the side cut that's very hard to pick up, but very effective on snow. This has a down the center medium kind of flex, but with excellent full camber-like pop without the catch of camber. I found that you could butter with this with a little effort as well. Even though this flex has a lot of pop, it has that Never Summer dampness. It's not the dampest Never Summer board out there by far, but Never Summer boards always do well in all conditions. This is really good in soft, uneven snow, but it also does very well in hard, micro-bumpy snow too. It's pretty quick to initiate a turn, and when you get it on edge, it has a pretty balanced, almost turny side cut to it that allows you to make any kind of radius turn you want. On groomers, in powder, it becomes more straight line friendly, but I already talked about that. There is such amazing spring out of the turn. I feel like I'm on a full camber board, even though it's forgiving. I just love how it snaps back and forth with any kind of radius turn you want to make, and just has this drivey, lively experience when it comes to turning. And if you want to point it here and there, this isn't a bad choice. And the base is pretty fast, especially when well waxed. This has very good glide. So next up is the Standard Uninc. This is a mid-wide favorite, but it's not just for mid-wides. This is one of the best switch riding and one of the better powder floaters on this list, with great grip, and it's best for people who own full-size discs. What I showed you was an older model, but the only difference is the graphics. This is more for mid-wide to wide, committed intermediates on up to experts. I find myself recommending this a lot to riders who are like size 10 and up in the normal sizes, or riders who might be shorter and lighter but have a slightly bigger boot than most people do at that height and weight. They call this a directional volume twin, which means it's a true twin between the contact points, but they have a different nose and tail. The tail has a lot less surface area, the nose has a lot more. So on groomers, this feels almost like a true twin, but in powder, when you set this back on the setback inserts, you get better directional float. And when you set this up on reference stance, it's centered on side cut at a 21.5 inch stance width, which is very reasonable. Many other boards in this size range are more like 22, 22 and a half. So this is better for a lot of people with normal stance widths. Now in powder, if you have full-size discs to go with these 4x4 setback inserts, you can get 2¼ inches back from center of board at a 21.5 inch stance as well. So the setback on board matches the reference stance, which is something I always appreciate. Then you have a mostly camber profile, but with some early rise. It's not true camber like they say on their marketing material. That little bit of early rise before the nose and tail makes this a little more forgiving and a little more floaty. There are 2 indentions on each side of the side cut on the inside of the inserts that allow this board to grip a little better, and it also gives it faster turn initiation than you would think for the width over the inserts. It's also wider over the inserts than it looks based on the waist width. It makes for very competent grip in hard snow. This flex is a little bit on the softer side of medium, It has a lot of easy give in the nose and tail that's fun to butter, but yet it has pretty good dynamic pop on an ollie, as well as spring out of a turn. This flex personality works pretty well in hard, uneven snow. In soft, wet, thick, messy, uneven snow, it can get a little bucky, but it's very manageable. Overall, it's a good all-day ride, as long as you're not really trying to charge through everything. If sized right, this initiates a turn very quickly. It's a little bit on the turny side of balance, but it has an easy entry side cut wise by the nose and tail, so it can go straight very well. And it really has good spring out of the turn. It's very satisfying, especially for being a little bit on the medium soft side of medium. And this base is upper tier, but maybe not the best of the best. Next up is the hard snow favorites. And remember, if any of these boards appeal to you, it helps us greatly if you check out our sponsor, Blauer Board Shop, and see if they have this for sale. We have lots of links to their store. If you click through and buy, it really helps support honest, objective reviews. And first up is the Basic Uninc, new for 2025. If you want a twin that's ready for a powder day with setback inserts. This is a very fun, aggressive mountain freestyle twin. It's just so fun to ride. I didn't want to send it back. I'm hoping to get a 158. This is more for advanced expert riders. This is a true twin shape with setback inserts. The shape was changed a little bit versus the older model. The surface area in the nose and tail is not as much as it used to be. It also has a little more camber. It's centered on side cut at a 22.5 inch stance width, and the setback on board is 2¼ inches at a 22.5 inch stance width as well. So if you see a little powder, you can set this twin back and get some decent but not amazing directional float. And with this camber profile, they call it true camber. It's not. It's mostly camber with a little bit of early rise. It feels like it's a touch less than the Standard Uninc, but still not full camber. So it makes it a little less technical than full camber, but it's still more advanced expert riders. And it helps give the smaller surface area, nose and tail, a little more float. So this has what's called underbite, and that's 2 indentions by the inserts on each side. That creates 4 extra contact points on each side cut. It gives it very good grip. That's what makes this such a good hard snow favorite. It's very competent all the way up into icy snow. It does grab a little bit in soft snow, but it's not a deal breaker, and it's still a very fun soft snow ride. This has a medium-ish flex with very good dynamic pop. I think it feels like a step up from the Standard Uninc. Buttering is okay, but it's not as easy as the older model that had a little more early rise, a little easier leverage in the tip and tail. I found that this was a pretty good all-day ride. It can be a little bucky and bouncy in soft, uneven snow, but it's not bad. Very good in hard, uneven snow, and overall a good all-day ride. The turn initiation is pretty fast, and when you get this on edge, it has a pretty balanced turning experience. That's the theme of all mountain. They want to do a little bit of everything. But there is lots of spring out of the turn, more so than the old Basic Uninc, and I really enjoyed this turning experience, especially switch and regular. Now last but far from being the least on the list is this Lib Tech Dynamo. This is the more directional daily driver for those who see hard snow. This is more for advanced to expert riders as well. I don't have a beginner intermediate board for the hard snow favorites. Maybe an honorary mention is the Lib Tech Terrain Wrecker. That's loose between the feet, but forgiving, stable, and when you get it on edge, it grips very well, has a little setback on board for easy directional float. So if you want something forgiving, maybe check that out. This is slightly tapered and directional. For 2025, they added a little more surface area in the nose, and maybe a touch more in the tail, but it has the same ride on the contact area as the older board did. So if you see one of those for sale, it's a good choice as well. I've ridden both models, and while I like the newer one just a little bit better, the old one was no slouch, and I put a lot more time on it after I did the review. And I'm doing an updated review with the new shape that's coming soon. On reference stance, or what I think might be reference stance because it's not marked with Lib Tech, it seems like it's about 21.5 inches. And with that, you get an inch back from center of side cut. That's a lot, but it doesn't feel tapered and directional. If you want to set it all the way back in powder, you can go negative 2.5 inches back from center of board with a free the taint 22.75 inch stance width. And while you get a little more surface area in the nose for easier directional float, you have a very full camber ride with only an almost flat, slightly passive bend in the middle that's above the snow still. So from tip to tail, this feels like a full camber board. It's pretty technical, pretty catchy, but it's got a lot of spring and pop and that camber stability that we all love. This is almost full mag, and that means 7 pretty pronounced contact points per side. So this grips incredibly well. This is a board that I just keep recommending to people who email me that see a lot of hard snow. They always want something that's dynamic and fun to turn, but still grips well in hard snow and has some capability for easier directional float when they get the powder. Maybe it's not the best, not as good as the Lib rig, but pretty good. This has a medium-ish flex that feels pretty consistent throughout the board. Because of that camber, it's not that easy to butter in the nose or the tail, but man, does this pop well on an ollie and spring well out of a turn. This is also a very competent all-day ride. It can be a touch bucky in soft, uneven snow. It's very competent in hard, uneven snow like it should be. The turn initiation, if you size it right, is medium fast. When you get this on edge, it has a very balanced turning experience and exceptional spring out of the turn, even though this isn't a full-on, stiff, super hard carver. If you're like me, an average rider, and you want a board that's a little easier to engage and carve with, not the full-on stiff carver, but still want a lot of spring and pop out of the turn, this is exceptional. I have so much fun turning on this. So there you have it. That's the list. And if you want to keep supporting honest, objective reviews, please click through our links and buy. And if you can, buy through Blauer Board Shop. They're doing a lot to help keep us producing honest, objective reviews. Check out our Patreon, become a member there, follow us on Instagram, and like and subscribe as always. And thanks for being here all these years. All right.